All right.
So I'm going to answer the question you just asked me and then ask you to introduce yourself. You asked what's my agenda here. And really, this is a reaction to having spent a number of years doing more traditional materiality analyses, where companies pay consultants like me to look at their issues and help them clarify what they're going to publish in their environmental, social, and governance, or ESG reports. And feeling like it hasn't been totally useless, but almost. Like, it just has not really informed the transformation agenda that we need. And so I've kind of complained about that publicly. Like, I've blogged about it, I've talked with you about it and a bunch of others, but I just decided that I should, if I'm going to ask others to really transform their business models or look at things in a very different way, why don't I take my own advice and do that? So I've sort of parked my everyday consulting work, and I'm just doing this as a project to see what would happen if I explored materiality the way I think it needs to be explored. What would that look like? And then just put it out there.
Yeah, that I can think of no better person than you to do that.
Oh, well, thank you. With that, I'll jump into our formal interview here, and I'll ask you to introduce yourself, in whatever words you like, to share who you are and what you do in the world.
All right. So from now, I'm basically I'm Thomas Jepsen. I'm an entrepreneur, and I like working with tackling what I think is social complex problems using computer facilitated collaboration. And that's also why I did my master's in electronics engineering with a major in collaborative tech and methodology. And part of that was actually in the US, where I was studying methodologies and collaborative technology, and basically learned how to run, for example, one of the things, how to facilitate a meeting with 100, 200 people, and using electronic meeting systems, which I think is a very good example of what can be done if you facilitate a collaborative session with more people. And when they go out of a meeting like that, they will often tell me that this is one of the most efficient meetings they've ever had. And that's because they were there and they were engaged and they were not passive listeners. So that's a good way to do it. After that, I guess I worked a lot on infrastructure as a consultant and also as a developer of big liner companies and also telecommunication industry. Also worked in startups and security, with security and data management. And for the past 7 years, as you probably know, I've been working on a startup called ACT, which is basically a company that I founded in 2015 with the focus of creating a more people and planet friendly future using computer facilitated collaboration. And it's a marketplace of marketplaces that allows shoppers to choose tomato A or tomato B because it's produced in a way that emits the least CO2. And it's also a data gathering tool that helps us gather the data at an almost infinite data gathering capability. So it's basically about collaboration, how to enable people collaborating around gathering data so that we can make the right decisions. And ACT is also a democratic software development company. And I've only heard about one other company in Norway that does that. And it's modeled off the biggest workers' cooperative in the world, which is the Mondragon Corporation in Spain, which is around 100,000 employees, one person, one vote, max 8 between highest and lowest paid, and the board is elected by employees, and we do the same. So that's about it.
Cool, thanks. And I'll just disclose as well how we're connected. So we haven't actually met in person, which feels funny because we've known each other for a little over a year, I guess, and we've had a chance to chat quite a bit across our networks. And I'd say we're connected as sort of friends across multiple nodes in a system of professionals committed to doing the kind of work that you just described and some of the kind of ESG disrupting that I'm doing. And I would also say you've been a huge inspiration for me in terms of understanding the potential of tech, which is not a place I normally go. So you've kind of sparked a lot of ideas, some of which have shown up in some of my writing, and also just spreading rumors about what you do, because I think it's really neat. So really appreciate you taking the time, especially at the stage you're in right now. And startups are never dull. So I'll jump in and take a couple introductory questions, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts. So just before going into the specifics of the assessment, do you have a relationship with Google, the company we're assessing today? And if so, what would that relationship be?
Yep. Personally, I use Google services a lot, like search, timeline, maps, contacts, email, calendar, and translate. And they have a lot of really cool tools, I think. Yeah. And we also use Google Cloud as one of our hosting providers in Act, and Google Suite for business operations.
Amazing. Okay. And do you have another kind of commercial relationship where they are in any way a client or a funder?
They do actually fund, at least so far they have funded a little bit of our infrastructure with some credits. Huh. They might fund more, unless they don't like my interview, I guess. But
well, and that's part of the spirit of transparency, just making sure. Back to your earlier question, actually, one of the big differences I think is important in materiality. The way it's traditionally done, nobody knows what any of the stakeholders have said. It's a black box. We don't even know who the stakeholders are. As much as possible, I think it's important to hear whose perspectives are we getting, and where possible to make those perspectives a bit more public. So, right. Cool. Thanks for that. And we're going to be exploring Google and the business model of Alphabet Google in relation to the future we want. And I think it'd be really helpful to hear in your own words, what is that future? There's lots of talk in the world about regenerative economy, circular economy, sustainability, sustainable development, insert words of choice. I think it's really helpful to hear in your words, what is this future that we'd like to move towards?
Right. Yeah. No, I think people and planet issues should be on top of the agenda. And I think for people right now, I think the equality is a very important part to look at. Mm-hmm. So I think that future should be almost equal pay, and maybe a little bit of incentives towards people who contribute to societal impact. I think the Chinese rating is a good example. It has merit. I think it could be more open, transparent, and built by the people, and by a proactively democratic organization, maybe, or something like that, owned by the people or made by the people, as a status symbol instead of money for your contribution to society. I think that would be a great idea. I also think that it should be easier to get nutritional good food and know that it's good because it's part of people and human rights to have a good health. And without health, you can't really do anything. And then, of course, planet that are even bigger problems, right, for humanity, because it's just that we need to solve the people problems in order to solve the planet problems, right? Because if we don't collaborate, we can't solve these problems. And it's actually a relatively simple problem to solve. It's like and I think it's absolute the minimum for us to actually take a next step as society. So the 4 out of the 9 planetary boundaries should definitely be taken care of, because we have already crossed them, and that should be fixed. And I don't know if you want to hear how I think we could get there.
Sure, love to.
Okay, so I think there are 2 things: collaborative infrastructure and money, since we live in a money-driven system. So I think when it comes to collaborative infrastructure, I think the best example is to illustrate this is, imagine that an alien spaceship came out from far away from here, and they were the good guys. They wanted to help humanity, and because they look at us and they think they were kind of stuck in Stone Age when it comes to taking that next step that we need to take as humanity. And I think they would look at us and they would think, there is this app structure where today you can actually reach 2 billion people in 5 years' time. And I think that gives me an incredible hope of increasing collaboration if you build an app that can actually do that. And I think people don't understand what is the evidence of collaboration and what can we actually do if we start collaborating. And there is really no example. Like Amish building a barn in a weekend is a good example. Wikipedia maybe, but it's a few amount of people who built that platform actually, and it was kind of hard to participate. So electronic meeting systems, I mentioned that, but it's not something most people know about. That is another example. So the aliens would of course look at us and they would think, yeah, these primitive humans, we can make an app, and that app can proliferate maybe in 1 year and help people collaborate, right? They will build an app that actually makes it possible to collaborate at a much higher level than we're doing today. And the upside, I think, of solving that problem is an incredible acceleration of humanity, and that is an extremely hopeful situation. And I also think that the second factor is money, because money is the same kind of infrastructure that perforates society all over. And I think we need to move to get there. We need to move the most money the fastest towards the people and planet friendly direction, basically, and do it democratically. And I think the consumers are the ones, the best candidate for that. If you buy tomato A or tomato B at scale, you can move the most money the fastest and democratically. So if we go back to the alien spaceship, they would just build the app so that it makes it easy to buy tomato A or tomato B, and everybody would see that that's the fact. And that's basically the app that ACT is building right now, trying to.
I love it. Yeah. So you're sort of working on behalf of the aliens is what I heard there.
Yeah, we are kind of assuming that role.
That's brilliant. Cool. Anything else about the future you want to say, like how you would see that future being, or does that sound like?
I think the biggest challenge for humanity is to learn how to collaborate. We need to do everything we can. And I see everything in that light. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't solve that problem, we are doomed. I mean, we can't even prevent a dictator from harassing. I mean, we can't even stop pumping oil. All these things, it's just extreme. I remember I once did a calculation of how much oil are we actually pumping up, and it's vulgar to think about. I think it's a pipeline the size of 2 Golf, like Volkswagen Golfs, right? That's the diameter. Yeah. And then we're pumping, 50, 70 kilometers per hour oil up that pipe on a constant basis. I mean, come on. How stupid can you be?
Yeah. Yikes.
I think it's so stupid. And the thing is, there's no one who actually understands. Well, everybody knows, right? That's the thing. That's a Canadian
Leonard Cohen
reference there.
Knows, yeah.
And everybody knows, but nobody is in control, and nobody is really doing a lot. I mean, very few people are doing something to actually change the system, which is giving us this kind of situation. And there is no real way either that they can act on a large scale, and I think that's just horrible. Yeah. So I think companies like Google, and even money, right? The bigger the company, the bigger the impact you can have. So it's a fantastic opportunity for big companies if they can manage to. And I actually think it's even a possibility, because they're run by 2 people, right? They could actually make those decisions, and if they did, boom, that would change a lot of money being moved.
Yeah.
And they are already working with facilitation, right? We're using Google Cloud and Google Suite to run our company. That's collaboration. They're facilitating right there, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into how their business model plays into that future. So let's jump in there. And as much as possible, let's stay on the business model itself, essentially how Google makes money. And you've touched on some of the products that you use. I use some of those products as well. 80% of their revenue, at least according to their 2021 annual report, still comes from forms of advertising. So their main revenue source is advertising, different types of advertising placed throughout the web. And that revenue, if I'm remembering correctly, was somewhere in the neighborhood of 259 billion US last year, which, just for fun, that's about the equivalent of the Canadian economy at the same time. So there are, like, pretty big. So to your second half of the solution, there's a lot of money at play there.
Yep.
So thinking about that business model and how they function, and focusing in particular for the moment on positive impacts. When you think about Google's activities and impacts, what do you believe it's doing, if anything, to create the future that you described, that positive future? What evidence or examples would you point to, and as many details as you can give us?
Right. So I would just maybe, can I go a little bit further down the route of understanding Google?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So the majority of money, they come from search and marketing. They're actually building more revenues, as I understand it. I think this "do no evil" is a good slogan. Actually, it's not totally bad. It's a bit the opposite, but yeah, I think it's good actually. And they have a lot of assets and they have a lot of revenue. I think the net revenue was 76 billion after costs. So that's pretty bad, right? And that means that they could allocate that money to something interesting, and the assets as well, right?
Yep.
And Google is a part of a global infrastructure and basically financed mostly with marketing. And that is actually what I would call an old push model, where people basically, or companies, spend money to put products in front of people so that they buy those products, right? And of course, before that, they know a lot about the people through gathering of a lot of data. But these people that get those products in front of them, they might not necessarily need those products right now. And if they do, they have several alternatives, and it's not necessarily the one that is placed right in front of their heads, which is the right thing. Again, we're back to the tomato A or tomato B. Let's say they put tomato A in front of you. That would be a good thing, but they don't necessarily do that, right? It could be tomato B, and that would be bad, because it's actually better to buy tomato A. So I think they could, I think we need to, I can talk more about that later, maybe how we could move away from that push model. But I think that, I think in general, they're actually going down. I would characterize their activities on collaboration, probably on collaboration and people, I think. Not so much on planet. They have some on planet. But I think collaboration, because collaboration is such a critical factor for the future, they have so many activities down that route that if they were used in the right way, that could actually really have a huge impact. So like Cloud, Google Suite, Chrome is a communication tool like Google Maps, Timeline, Translate, Google Home to a certain extent. I guess they all help people in certain ways solve problems in everyday life. DeepMind is also a potential collaborator tool, right? If you use it the right way, you could actually do that. Could make a brain for the world, right? I guess that's what the idea is as well. And Waymo, autonomous driving, I think it's all improvements of infrastructure, and Wing, similar problem, right? And Google Fiber, give people a plug in their home so they can actually get access to the information. And robotics, those are collaborative things, I would call them. Yeah, I think so. But and of course, this development part they also have is a big deal, because it can also be used in a lot of good ways with the right focus, right? But there's almost nothing working on equality. I didn't see anything that came down that route, and I think that would be good to see. Health, the Calico, the aging, I think it's a great idea. Personally believe it's the most important problem to solve for human health, because if you solve the aging, then people can keep a longer focus, and I think that's a great idea. Maybe we would be more long-term thinking individuals if we lived longer. And the doc discovery, I guess that's in the same lane, and Virali. The funding, of course, again, funding great if you use it in the right way, because all these things can be used in the wrong way too, or it can be used in an ignorant way, which is currently what is happening, right? It's just
Yeah.
generating cash. It's not really being used in a deliberate way to increase. And then there's the old push, right? The old push model where you put in front of people a product they don't necessarily need because the company that has the product happens to have a lot of money and they can pay Google to do that. And that's an old model, and it's not the model we need right now.
Right.
I think YouTube, sure, it's great, but again, it's jaded because of the marketing, right? Then you can pay to get rid of it, and that's kind of a good way, I guess, for the people who can afford it. But yeah.
Yes. So you're in some
Was there
ways you're
anything more?
answering. Yeah. So you're sort of both answering the, what are the positive impacts, and you're jumping into the negative, which is great. So I'm just going to reshape the question a little and see if
Right.
there's more that comes to mind for you, including just from your own experience, like out in the world, seeing how tech can drive change.
Yeah.
So especially you talked about the collaboration piece, and clearly so many of those tools that you just described with Google, like they make things possible, right, across the world and regions and languages. And when you talked about your vision of the future, that feels like a really key part. Are there other things that you see Google's products doing now already that potentially contribute to that future? And I'm going to tack on the other half of that question in case it comes to mind more readily, which is, or which undermine that future. So activities or impacts that they're actually doing right now that you think either contribute or undermine that future that you described.
Right. I like the environmental insight explorer. That was a good idea, where they could they're kind of helping cities map emissions on a map using this software. I think that's a good idea, and that's actually giving people data to say this way of doing city planning is good, this way is not so good, right? And that's a good direction, I would say. Yeah. And can I say a little bit more about the
go for it,
potential that I think that I mean, I think the biggest, like one of the good things I think is the app infrastructure that through Android have been pushed out there, because again, it gives the aliens this app that can reach 2 billion people, right? And that is a good thing. That is a good thing if it's used in the right way, again. And I think that is where the main problem is with Google. And because if they continue to use this non-democratic governance model that has been used for the past 300 years, not by Google, of course, but I mean, it's also kind of reflected in the yearly reports, right? Where Larry Page is expressing his control of the company and the direction. And I don't think that's a good role model, actually, for the future. Because what is it that we... Yeah, because I mean, I'm Danish, right? I'm from a very democratic country with a big social mobility, like the biggest in the world. If you're born from a poor mom, you have the biggest chance in the world of actually getting somewhere and socially, rank-wise. And I think with Ukraine being overtaken by a dictator regime right now, we really need a good role model that stands and really does something else than being a dictator, right? So I think we need to think about how we can reshape the global business world so that it becomes democratic and collaborative, so that we can solve the biggest challenge of humanity, which is to learn how to collaborate. And I think it's almost impossible to do that without being collaborative through and through. Like, you have to be collaboration, and that cannot be done by the old 300-year-old model anymore. That was great until now, maybe. But I think something new has to come on the market. And there are lots of ways to do this, right? Like a co-op is one way to do it, but there are other ways too. And I'm guessing that with such innovative people on board. I mean, they have all the resources in the world to do this the right way.
Yeah.
So do it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A few questions, Spark. Maybe we'll have time at the end, but I just want to check, are there more things you would notice from their current model and the way they operate and their current products that you feel undermine that future? So you kind of alluded to the dictatorial nature, the lack of democratic impact. Any other things that you look at and you go, this is not what we need. It's causing trouble for that future that we want.
Yeah, I think the old push model is a huge problem because it wastes people's time by looking at products they don't need. And they do that by tracking people. And if that ends up in the wrong hands, it can be used for malicious purposes. And also, in general, not that, it's just the money, the amount of money that is moved from to some ignorant direction.
Yeah.
That's the problem. That's the biggest problem at all, like overall. If you move so much money ignorant in a direction without knowing the consequences of the money that you're moving by the facilitation you're doing, like Google is a huge facilitation company. There was a TED talk recently that talked about that Google should actually look at the consequences of their actions, like the consequences of all the actors using their platform, instead of just looking at a net zero for themselves.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to find that TED Talk. Thank you. I'm going to track that down. That's
Yeah. But again, it's the same thing. I mean, how much money are you moving in the world, right? And in what direction are you moving that money?
Yeah.
And how fast, and and how democratic are you doing it? I think it's so important to do that the right way. And they have all the time, all the resources in the world. I mean, they're number 15 in the world or something in terms of money earned.
It's intense, the amount of money flowing there. I'm picturing that pipeline you described of oil, but of money for Google, and it's a big one. Okay, cool. It's helpful to hear that. As more ideas flow, keep them coming, but I'm going to push us forward a little. I'm actually going to share my screen, and I'm just going to double check. Tell me, do you see a Google slide with your name on it at the top? Okay, good. So here I'm going to do something that's actually drawing on the old school of materiality, which I think is impossible and broken, but I'm going to borrow it anyway. So bear with me. I'm going to ask you to help offer a ranking of Google. Right now, I've got a representation of the company just sitting in the middle, but we're going to place them based on your perspective now on how the business model and its impacts and activities, the whole package, is contributing to societal health, and that's the horizontal axis. And anything that is having a net negative impact is to the left of this line, down to -5, positive impact up to +5 along the right. And that would be societal health. And then environmental or ecosystem health on the vertical, anything below the line down to -5, essentially undermining, causing harm, above being contributing to that future we want. So what I'm looking for you to do here is tell me where to place the Google bubble. And I'm just acknowledging it's an impossible and kind of stupid question to say, like, take this whole ginormous $259 billion company and place their impacts on everything in one place. But I'm going to ask you to do it anyway and tell me where you would put it and why.
I look at this as people and planet. And I would say the bigger the company, the more money is moved in either a good or a bad direction. And because Google doesn't have a facilitation system that actually moves it in a bad direction, it's proven that capitalism moved in the wrong direction. So I would put it on a negative score.
Okay.
On both. Yeah. But I don't know how far. I mean, they have an incredible potential to do the other thing, right? That's
but based on today, based on what you see, what you know to be true.
They're very, very negative.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me where, should I go further down, further left?
Yeah, put it on 4 or something. I mean,
okay, like about there.
It should be negative, right? Because it's bad. Yeah. Because it's so big and it's ignorant. Had it been, I mean, I know they want to do good and they don't want to do evil, yeah. But they need to look out of the box. I think they have an incredible potential to be at +5, right? But they're not doing it, and that's ignorant. And I think that has to do with that facilitating in the right direction.
Yeah.
With
Okay.
the tool.
Great. Thanks for humoring that rather impossible question, and you've explained why as well. So super helpful. Couple more questions. These ones are a little bit more in the imagination realm. This just in, and actually I kind of wish this were true. You are in charge of everything. So the aliens actually took over and they're like, you've been working really hard for us. Thank you. You are now in charge of everything. Nothing is in the way. What changes would you make at Google?
Yeah, be a role model in both in terms of people and planet. And the biggest challenge for humanity right now is to learn how to collaborate. So Google, I think you can't. Yeah, so if you really want to do no evil, you should focus on that, right? You should focus on how I think the organizational model of Google is put together. And maybe, for example, this $76 billion in surplus. Can we democratically allocate them with the 150,000 employees in the company having a one vote per person? Maybe that would be one way to do it. I'm just suggesting here. And that would be one way. Then you would have a more democratic allocation of funds. And I'm sure that out of that would come extreme innovation in the direction of what a collaborative company working on the most important challenges of the world would want to work on. But I think they're already doing it a lot, right, in the right direction. But they just have to be collaboration and probably know what they're facilitating with their tools.
Yeah, love it. And the aliens are they're glad they promoted you. This also just in, so new scenario, you're no longer in charge of everything, unfortunately, but you do fortunately have a direct line to the current CEO, who is Sundar Pichai, and he takes your calls. He's like, oh my gosh, it's Thomas calling. Of course I'm going to call, but he's really tight on time, even tighter than you. So you've only got 30 seconds. He wants to know what you think, but you've got 30 seconds. What do you tell him?
To solve the huge people and planet problems we have in front of us, we need to learn how to collaborate. I think it's the greatest challenge of today. To get there, I think Google needs to become democratic, because it's not possible to fund collaboration without being collaboration through and through. And in a way, I think it's a very natural move. Google is, to a large degree, the biggest infrastructure in the world. It should be representing the world. And I think they could do that through democratic governance, possibly even owned by the users or something. And ACT would certainly like to work with Google as a democratic partner if they take that move, of course.
Awesome.
So
cool. Yeah, he just got cut off, but he was really glad you called. That's terrific. Thank you, Thomas. Those were the questions I had prepared for you. But before we wrap up, were there questions I didn't ask you that you really want to make sure we capture in thinking about, how could Google contribute to this future we want, or questions for me about the process or anything else?
No, I think it's okay. I think no, I think that's a very, very important stuff that you're doing. Great work, and free thinking, as you're good at.
Oh, well, thank you. Really appreciate your time and attention and good thoughts here. So I'll stop the recording here with much gratitude. Thanks so much, Thomas.
Great.